All right, so this is going to be the first section of notes for chapter 15, anatomy of the kidney, anatomy of the nephron. This will be an introductory to some anatomy for the urinary system. So first, let's talk about the physiology of the urinary system. What do the kidneys do? Well, their job is to maintain purity and consistency of our internal fluid, which is blood. Your kidneys are responsible for filtering blood and creating waste product, which is going to be urine. They're going to maintain the pH of your blood, the osmolarity of your blood, the water content of your blood, the positive and negative ions that are in your blood. Kidneys are going to also get rid of nitrogenous waste or nitrogen-containing waste, which is a byproduct of protein destruction, as well as nucleic acids. Any types of toxins and drugs are going to be filtered out. Your kidneys process literally thousands of milliliters of blood a day. However, you only urinate about 1 to 2 maybe liters of urine in a day. So it's a pretty efficient system. So on this slide, it's going to talk about the 5 major functions of the kidneys. Well, one is going to get rid of or dispose of waste from blood. It's going to, as I just mentioned, regulate the chemical makeup of our blood. So looking at the water to salt or water to ion content, and help maintain our pH of 7.35. Your kidneys, believe it or not, are responsible or play a role in maintaining your blood pressure. There is a reaction that occurs when filtration rate in your kidneys is low. So if you have a low filtration rate in your kidneys, it could mean that systemic blood pressure is low, and that will actually stimulate a reaction that causes the enzyme renin to be produced, and renin will ultimately cause blood pressure to go up, to increase filtration rate, to get out the bad stuff, if you will. Your kidneys are also responsible for monitoring oxygen saturation on your hemoglobin molecules. And if the kidneys are sensing that there is low saturation of oxygen, the hormone erythropoietin will be produced, and that will stimulate red bone marrow to produce red blood cells. And then finally, something that the kidneys do is that it converts vitamin D into a usable form. And vitamin D is a precursor to things like cholesterol, and then cholesterol is a precursor to our steroid hormones. So vitamin D plays a crucial role in the body. So here's just looking at, I'll zoom in a little bit here. I am using my phone. Here is the urinary system. So we've got 2 kidneys. I don't know if I can get a pointer. I don't think that I can, but we've got 2 kidneys, and if you notice, the right kidney is a little lower than the left kidney. That is anatomically correct because we have the largest organ in the body, which is the liver, taking up a big chunk of the right abdominal pelvic cavity, so it pushes that kidney a little lower. You're going to see the yellow ureter extending from the kidney down to the urinary bladder. That is what is going to move urine that is produced in the kidney down to the bladder, which is this temporary storage tank until urination happens. Urine does not flow because of gravity, it flows because of peristalsis. All right, so let's talk about our kidneys. Our kidneys are small, they're kidney bean shaped. They're located probably a little higher than what you think they are. They get a little coverage from your floating ribs. And so they're situated between about the thoracic 12 vertebrae and lumbar 3. They are in the posterior or dorsal body cavity. And as I just mentioned, the right kidney is slightly lower than the left due to the liver. They're about the size of a bar of soap. So this is looking at a cross-section of a kidney. I think they're quite pretty. So in the cross-section of the kidney, you're going to see the lighter area on the outside. That's the cortex. The inner area that's like a darker red is called the medulla. So you'll hear renal cortex, renal medulla. But as you can see here, the medulla is actually separated by some cortical tissue. We call those separations between these little medulla pyramids. You'll also hear renal pyramids or medullary pyramids. The cortex separates each of these pyramids by way of renal columns. You have the ureter coming up into the kidney at the kidney's belly button, and we've learned that term before. It's called the hilum. The ureter will then widen to become the renal pelvis. Then the renal pelvis will narrow into what are called major and then minor calyxes. So the kidneys have that medial indentation, like I said, the renal hilum, and I'll go back for a second. Again, I wish I had a pointer here. So the renal pyramid, which are in the medulla, that's where urine is produced. The urine is captured by the minor calyx, which then flows to the major calyx, which then flows to the renal pelvis, which then flows to the ureter, and the ureter will bring urine down to the bladder. Okay? Another thing to note is that the adrenal glands sit on top of the kidney, and we learned about that in chapter 9. They are a separate organ altogether, but they do sit on top of the kidney. The kidneys have a pretty extensive blood supply, and that makes sense because their job is to filter blood, and we will be looking at that. So here is the renal blood supply. So starting with the renal artery, which comes off the abdominal aorta or descending aorta, everything's coming into the kidney at the renal hilum or hilus. So you've got the renal artery that's going to come in, and it's going to separate into some different arteries that are then going to go up and over the renal pyramids. So you're going to have arterial blood kind of going out into the kidney, and then venous blood coming back. The venous blood is going to ultimately get into the renal vein, which will dump into the IVC, which this slide is showing right here is a structure in yellow, which is called the nephron. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. It is responsible for producing urine, so for filtering your blood. And as you can see, there's a part of them that is in the medullary pyramid, and there's a part of them that's out in the cortex. But that, maybe I can zoom here, this portion that looks like a little C, that is called Bowman's capsule. And then you have a little squiggly part right off of that. That is called the proximal convoluted tubule. You have a big long loop that is called the loop of Henle. You have another little squiggle, and that is called the distal convoluted tubule, and then it straightens out to go down the renal pyramid. That is called the collecting duct. All of these different pieces of a nephron, they have different functions, and we will learn about those. But it is this yellow thing, the nephron, that produces urine. So again, this is just going over some terminology that we just mentioned. The renal cortex on the outside, the renal medulla or medullary pyramids, which are the inner things that look like little triangles. The renal pyramids are going to be separated by cortical tissue called renal column. The pelvis is the widening of the ureter when it comes into the hilum. And then the pelvis branches off. It's almost like little tree branches into calyces. The larger ones are major calyces, and the smaller are minor. Okay. So this slide shows you more of that. So the renal pelvis going into the major calyces and the minor calyces, the renal column on the outside, the renal cortex on the outside, the medullary pyramids that look like little upside down triangles that are separated by renal columns. And then the only other thing mentioned on this slide is the renal capsule. And so that is a fibrous connective tissue sheath capsule on the outside that's there for protection. And so, as I just mentioned, the kidneys have a really, really intense blood supply. Why? They're responsible for processing 1/4 of the blood volume every single minute. And we're going to look at the blood supply in just a second. So there are specific arteries, which then turn into capillary beds and then come back into veins. So we've got the renal artery that comes off of the abdominal or descending aorta, which comes into the kidney at the hilum. It's going to branch into segmental arteries, which are then going to flow into interlobar arteries. You also might read interlobular arteries, which are then going to flow into arcuate arteries, which then flow into cortical radiate arteries. After the cortical radiate arteries, I don't have this on this slide, but something to add is the afferent, AFFERENT arteriole. The afferent arteriole then goes into glomerular capillaries. The glomerular capillaries, they actually do not dump into a venule. They dump into another arteriole. They dump into the efferent arteriole, EFFERENT arteriole. This is the most unique capillary bed in the body, the glomerular capillaries, because they are fed and drained by an arteriole. What this does is that it produces super duper high blood pressure in the glomerular capillaries, so high that the only way it can basically work is to filter out all of the stuff in blood that is small enough to cross the plasma membrane. So we learned about back in chapter 3 that we had a type of passive transport across the plasma membrane of cells, and one was filtration. And we talked about how it was dealing with hydrostatic or fluid pressure. This is where this comes to life in the glomerular capillaries. So again, glomerular capillaries are fed by the afferent arteriole, then drained by the efferent arteriole. The efferent arteriole then feeds the peritubular capillaries. The peritubular capillaries are totally different than the glomerular capillaries. They are super low pressure so that they can actually reclaim a lot of stuff that was filtered out of blood. Now we're going to start the venous tract back. So the peritubular capillaries are going to drain into cortical radiate veins, which then drain into arcuate veins, which then drain into interlobar veins, which then dump into renal veins. So it almost perfectly mirrors itself. However, if you're noticing, there are no segmental veins. Once you see this in an image, I think it will make better sense for you. This is like the most Dr. Seuss looking kidney I've ever seen. So here you have the renal artery coming in at the hilum, and it's going to branch into segmental arteries right in the renal pelvis. Off of the segmental arteries, they are going to branch into arcuate arteries, and arcuate arteries go in between the renal pyramids. Interlobar arteries are going to go in between the renal pyramids, and then they're going to arc over the top of the renal pyramids. So segmental arteries were kind of down here at the bottom of the screen. Interlobar arteries are going in between the pyramids. Arcuate arteries arc over the top of the pyramids, and then cortical radiate arteries look like little eyelashes in red going out into the cortex. They radiate out into the cortex. So to me, interlobar arteries go in between the medullary pyramids. Arcuate arteries arc over the top of the pyramids. Cortical radiate arteries radiate out into the cortex. Then again, we go into afferent arteriole, glomerular capillaries, efferent arteriole, and then peritubular capillaries. Now we're going to do the venous tract back. Cortical radiate arteries, they are the blue little eyelashes that you see above the renal pyramids, which then go into arcuate. So cortical radiate veins, arcuate veins, interlobar veins actually will then dump their blood directly into the renal vein, and then the renal vein is going to dump its blood into the inferior vena cava. So that's the path of blood here. I'm going to stop, and then I'll pick up another video with the nephron.